The desert sun beat down on the dusty main street of Red Rock Crossing, a frontier town balanced on the edge of civilization and wilderness. The heat shimmered off the whitewashed church building where townsfolk had gathered, not for worship, but for something far darker. A rough wooden platform stood in the churchyard, and atop it, Mary Whitlock. Mary tried to keep her spine straight, though her knees trembled. Her black dress, the one she had worn to her husband's funeral, was now faded and patched. The bonnet that should have shielded her face hung loose in her sweaty grip. She had no pride left to hide behind. Her husband, Daniel, had died a year ago, a mining accident that buried more than his body. It buried their security, their future, and their worth in the eyes of the town. She had no children, no land, and soon not even a name free of shame. The pastor's voice boomed like a judge's gavel. This woman stands before God and his church in debt. 3 months of unpaid tithes and absence from Sunday service. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Some avoided her eyes. Some stared with a cruel delight. A few whispered pity but dared not speak too loud. Challenging the church wasn't safe. Mary's voice cracked as she spoke up. "Pastor Green, I begged you for more time. I've been sewing for half the town, working every hour." He cut her off with a raised hand. "Excuses are for sinners. Discipline saves souls." Discipline. That's what they called it. Her heart pounded hard enough she feared it might break her chest open. She remembered Daniel holding her hand in church pews, telling her faith was mercy. How could mercy look like this? A man in the crowd snorted. "Should have found yourself a new husband quicker," he muttered to his buddy. Mary swallowed humiliation, tasting sand and despair. The pastor spread his arms wide dramatically. "Let us begin the bidding to settle this woman's debt. Restore her to God's grace and place her into a righteous household." Righteous. Mary clenched the fabric of her dress until her knuckles whitened. She knew what was coming, not righteousness, but ownership. Hands rose, greedy hands. A rancher known for beating the workers he hired. A widower with a reputation for drunken nights and locked doors. A man who had tried to proposition Mary only weeks after Daniel's burial. Each coin called out wasn't a kindness, it was a claim. Her breath came faster. She stared at the ground, trying to hold back tears. She would not cry. If she cried, they'd enjoy it more. Her heart whispered a single desperate prayer. "Please. Someone, anyone. Don't let them take me." The pastor's lips curled into a self-satisfied smile as the bidding rose. It wasn't about money, it was about power. He was punishing her refusal to remarry quickly, punishing her independence, punishing her grief. Going once, Mary's nails dug into her palms. Going twice, her future shrank to a single terrifying moment. Sold to. A shadow moved at the back of the crowd. A tall figure stepped forward, silent, steady, and commanding. A man whose presence parted the crowd like a blade through cloth. An Apache warrior. His long hair was tied with leather, his chest marked with symbols of his people. He wore a rifle slung across his broad back, not in threat, merely as someone always ready to survive. Gasps cut through the crowd. Mothers pulled children close. Men reached toward holsters but hesitated. This warrior did not walk like prey. He walked like justice. The pastor paled. You have no place in this holy matter." The Apache dropped a heavy leather pouch at the pastor's feet. The thud of silver coins echoed louder than the pastor's sermon ever had. More than her debt. His voice was low, rough as canyon stone. "She goes with me." He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stated truth. Mary's breath caught. Was she going from one fear into another? The town shelves stared, frozen between outrage and awe. No one dared outbid him. The pastor, faced with the undeniable glitter of money, swallowed his protest. Greed won over righteousness. Sold, he stammered. The Apache warrior turned to Mary. His dark eyes met hers, not possessive, not cruel, but calm, assessing whether she could still stand. Her legs felt like collapsing, but she remained standing, barely. He stepped closer and, without a word, removed his blanket and wrapped it gently around her shaking shoulders. Mary had been purchased, but for the first time in a year, she felt protected, not saved, not yet, but no longer alone. And that, in her darkest moment, felt like a miracle. The crowd's stunned silence hung over Red Rock Crossing like a desert heat wave. No one had ever seen anything like this. For weeks, townsfolk had whispered about the Apache warrior, a man who roamed the outskirts of the territory, rumored to be fierce, untamed, and loyal only to himself. Yet here he stood, calm, unyielding, and buying the freedom of a woman they considered nothing more than property. Mary's pulse raced. Her fingers fumbled at the folds of the blanket the warrior had draped over her shoulders. She wanted to step back, to run, to scream, but the intensity of his gaze held her rooted in place. There was something in the way he looked at her, not with desire, not with pity, but with quiet respect that made her chest tighten. Pastor Green's lips twisted in disbelief. "You dare," he started, but his voice faltered as the weight of the silver coin sank into the wooden church floor. The sound of metal against wood reverberated like a judgment bell. No argument could erase that moment. The warrior's payment was more than enough, far exceeding the church fines that had condemned her. The crowd's energy shifted. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who is he?" Some asked. "Why would he care?" Others murmured, suspicion and awe battling in their tones. Mary, for the first time in days, felt eyes on her that weren't filled with cruelty. The warrior bent slightly, letting his gaze meet hers directly. His dark eyes, deep as canyon shadows, held a strange promise. A promise of safety. A promise that, at least for now, the world would not own her. No woman should be sold. "But since you did—" "She comes with me," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in Mary's chest. Mary's lips parted, caught between fear and disbelief. This man, feared by the town and whispered about in cautionary tales, had just declared her freedom. Her throat tightened, a mix of gratitude and fear making it difficult to speak. I thank you," she stammered, unsure if the words were enough. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her thanks, but did not rush to comfort her. He was a man of action, not empty words. With deliberate calm, he gestured for her to step down from the auction platform. The wooden boards creaked beneath her weight, each sound echoing the finality of her escape from the pastor's grasp. The townsfolk parted instinctively as he led her away. Men's hands lingered near gun holsters, but none dared challenge him. Even the pastor, pale and shaking, stood frozen, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For once, authority was powerless. Mary's heart pounded as they moved toward the outskirts of town. She clutched the blanket tighter, aware of the heat of his presence nearby. The desert wind whipped at her hair, stinging her eyes, but the sensation paled compared to the whirlwind inside her. She had been sold, and yet somehow she was free. The warrior did not speak for a long while, his eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting danger at every turn. Mary finally dared a glance at him, noting the strength in his shoulders, the quiet confidence in his stride, the way he carried himself as if he owned nothing, yet controlled everything in the space around him. Where are you taking me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere you can breathe," he replied. His words were simple, but laden with meaning. "Somewhere you are not for sale." The phrase struck her like a thunderclap. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt a spark of hope. Not just hope, a fragile sense of safety, as if the walls of judgment and cruelty that had enclosed her life were beginning to crumble as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the desert in golden and crimson hues. The warrior led her toward a narrow trail disappearing into the rocky hills. Mary's fear mingled with wonder. She had no idea what awaited her. Yet she felt the strange certainty that whatever lay ahead, she would not face it alone. That night, as shadows stretched long and the wind whispered secrets through the canyon, Mary realized something profound. Freedom had a price. But courage, hers and his, had paid it. And in that realization, a new chapter of her life quietly began. The desert sky stretched wide and endless, painted in streaks of orange and purple as the sun sank behind the distant mesa. Mary Whitlock sat astride the sorrel horse the Apache warrior had handed her, the worn leather saddle creaking beneath her. She held the reins tightly, though she wasn't sure whether it was from fear of the horse, fear of the man beside her, or fear of what awaited beyond the horizon. Talon, the warrior who had bought her freedom, rode silently next to her. His horse moved with a steady, sure rhythm, each step deliberate and controlled, reflecting the man's own unwavering presence. His eyes, dark and watchful, occasionally flicked to her, and Mary felt a shiver run down her spine. He wasn't glaring at her, nor assessing her like property. He was simply watching, aware, protective. "Where are we going?" she asked at last, her voice small against the whispering wind. Talon's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on the trail ahead, the rocky path winding toward the mountains. "Somewhere you can be safe," he said finally, his voice low, almost a growl that seemed to echo against the canyon walls. "The town will not follow. The church cannot touch you there." Mary swallowed, trying to imagine a life beyond Red Rock Crossing. She had lived a year of grief, humiliation, and hardship, but she had never imagined someone like him would step into her life, fierce, untamed, and yet kind. The silence stretched as the horses carried them farther from the town, the crunch of hooves on gravel the only sound. Mary's mind raced with questions. Who was this man, really? Why had he cared enough to pay her debt, to remove her from the auction? And yet fear lingered. The town had called him enemy, outsider, dangerous. Could she trust him? By nightfall, they reached a narrow canyon, a natural shelter from wind and prying eyes. Talon dismounted and gestured for her to do the same. Mary's legs felt weak after the long ride, but she obeyed, grateful for solid ground beneath her boots. Talon worked quickly, his hands confident and precise as he prepared a fire. Sparks flew from flint to tinder, and soon a warm glow danced against the canyon walls. The smell of dry wood and smoke filled the air, and Mary felt the tension in her shoulders slowly ease. He motioned for her to sit on a nearby boulder. She did, shivering slightly despite the fire. Talon handed her a small piece of jerky, which she took hesitantly, unsure if he expected gratitude or politeness. "Eat," he said simply. "You need strength. You've been through much today." The simplicity of the gesture, food, warmth, protection, made Mary blink back tears. No one had treated her like this in months. No one had seen her as a person rather than a debtor or a burden. "Why? Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Talon hesitated, then finally spoke, his tone softer than she expected. "Because no one should be sold. Because you did not deserve it. And because I know what it is to be hunted, to be despised, to have the world tell you you are worth nothing. I could not let that happen again." Mary stared at him, her mind struggling to comprehend. A man feared by townsfolk, an Apache warrior risking himself for her sake. It was almost too much to believe. Yet, in the quiet glow of the fire, with the stars emerging overhead, She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hours passed, and the chill of night crept in. Talon handed her his blanket, not as a claim, but as a gesture of care. Mary wrapped herself in it, warmth seeping into her bones, and she realized that for the first time in months she felt safe. The fire crackled. The wind whispered through the canyon. And in that wilderness, Mary and Talon sat in a silence that was no longer heavy with fear, but filled with the quiet understanding that their fates had crossed for a reason, somewhere. Beyond the mountains, beyond the town's judgment and the church's rules, a new life awaited her. And for the first time, Mary dared to imagine it, not as a captive, not as a widow alone in shame, but as a woman with freedom, choice, and perhaps even a chance at love. The morning sun spilled gold across the canyon, glinting off the sandstone. Cliffs and warming the dusty trail where Mary Whitlock had spent her first night under the open sky, not under a church roof, not under judgment, but in the quiet safety of the wilderness. She stretched, feeling muscles sore from the ride, yet her mind was restless. Sleep had brought uneasy dreams, shadows of the auction platform, the echo of mocking voices, and the fear of what might have happened if Talon had not appeared. Talon, already awake, worked near the horses, his movements deliberate and steady. He checked their saddles, tended to the animals' hooves, and even packed a small bundle of food for the trail ahead. His face was calm, but Mary could see the faint tension in his jaw. A man who carried the weight of survival and history on his shoulders. She watched him for a long moment, the rising sun highlighting the sharp lines of his face and the depth in his dark eyes. She felt a strange pull, a combination of awe, gratitude, and a burgeoning curiosity. Slowly she approached, her boots crunching on the gravel. Do you always travel alone?" she asked, her voice tentative. Talon paused, glancing at her briefly. "Not always," he said. "But most people cannot be trusted. Most. People cannot see the truth of the world beyond their fences and pews." Mary hesitated, then asked the question she had been holding back. "Why me? Why did you pay my debt, risk coming into town?" He met her gaze squarely, and for a moment silence fell between them. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Because I have seen what it means to be hunted, despised, treated like nothing. I could not let it happen again, not to you." "You deserve more than what they gave." Mary's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Not the church, not the townsfolk. Not even the memory of her late husband, though he had loved her. He could not protect her from a world full of cruelty. Over the next days, as they journeyed deeper into the canyon trails and hidden valleys, Mary began to see another side of Talon. The man the town feared as an outsider, a warrior, a savage, was not harsh nor cruel. He was careful with the land, tending the horses, the plants, and even the small fire they relied upon at night. He taught her to ride with steadiness, to read the wind and the birds, to respect the wilderness not as something to conquer, but something to live with dot and turn. Mary shared her small knowledge. She helped him prepare meals, mend clothes, and even organize the small supplies he carried. In the quiet of their companionship, a bond began to form. She discovered that he carried scars, not just of the body but of the heart, betrayals from those he had trusted, the prejudice he faced from settlers, and the solitude he had chosen as a shield. Mary realized that, just as she had been broken by loss and injustice, Talon had been shaped and scarred by a world that never welcomed him. Slowly, gently, they began to heal each other's wounds. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Mary turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought anyone would care. Not like this." Talon looked at her, his eyes softening. For a brief moment, the warrior who had seemed so unyielding let himself show humanity, tenderness, and trust. "Caring is not weakness," he said. "It is strength. And you? You are stronger than you know." Mary felt warmth rise in her chest, not just from the fire crackling between them, but from the realization that for the first time in months, she was not defined by shame, by debt, or by loss. She was defined by her choices, her courage, and the slow, steady trust she had begun to place in this man who had appeared when all hope seemed lost. And though neither dared speak of love yet, a quiet understanding settled between them. They had both been broken by the world, but together, in the wilderness far from the eyes of judgmental townsfolk, they were beginning to rebuild themselves. Mary's gaze wandered to the horizon, imagining a future where fear did not dictate her life. Beside her, Talon was no longer just a warrior of legend. He was a companion, a protector, a mirror for her own resilience. And as the first stars appeared in the vast western sky, she understood that freedom was not just the absence of chains. Freedom was the ability to choose, to trust, and to love again. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and pine as Mary Whitlock and Talon prepared to continue their journey deeper into the rugged wilderness. For days they had traveled together, finding not only safety but an unspoken understanding that had begun to grow between them. Mary's heart had started to feel light again, her spirit free for the first time since the auction, but freedom is rarely unchallenged in the West. Sudden commotion on the ridge above them shattered the quiet. Dust rose in a cloud as a small group of riders appeared, galloping down the trail with determination and anger etched into their faces. Mary's stomach sank. She recognized the men instantly, Pastor Green and several townsfolk, armed and furious. Their eyes burned with self-righteous fury, and at their head, the pastor's lips twisted in a sneer. "There she is," he shouted. "The woman who owes the church. Return her at once." Talon's hand hovered over his rifle, but his body remained calm, controlled. His eyes scanned the riders, calculating. He knew they were outnumbered, but he also knew that violence wasn't always the answer. Mary, however, felt a surge of something unfamiliar: anger, defiance, and courage. For too long, she had been silent, powerless, humiliated, and afraid. Now, with Talon beside her, she realized she had a voice. "Stop!" she cried, stepping forward, her hands raised. The dust swirled around her, catching in her hair, framing her in the morning sun. "Stop! He didn't kidnap me. I'm not property. I'm Mary Whitlock, and I am free." The riders faltered at her words. They had expected fear, tears, submission, not this. The pastor's face reddened, veins standing out on his forehead. "You will come with us," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger. Mary shook her head, her voice steady now, ringing with newfound strength. "No, I belong to no one. You sold me for your greed. You humiliated me for your pride. And now I choose my own life. Leave, or you will answer to him, and to me." The townsfolk looked at Talon, whose presence alone radiated authority. His eyes met Mary's, a silent question. Was she certain? She nodded, firm. Talon stepped forward, towering and calm, his voice carrying over the wind. "She is under my protection. Any harm that comes to her will be answered. Turn back or face consequences you cannot survive." The pastor's mouth opened to speak, but no words came. He saw the truth in Talon's eyes, a man who had fought battles no townsperson could imagine, a man whose honor was unshakable. Standing beside a woman who no longer feared him or them, the townsfolk began to shift uneasily, the reality sinking in. Fear and respect battled within them. One by one, they loosened their grip on their weapons, and finally, the pastor turned his horse sharply. "This isn't over," he spat, though his voice lacked conviction. "But you haven't seen the last of me." Mary didn't flinch. She watched the riders retreat, dust trailing behind them like the remnants of a nightmare. Talon turned to her then, his expression softer than she had ever seen. No words were needed. His calm presence said it all. She was safe. She was free. And she had finally claimed her own voice. Mary stepped closer to him, her hand brushing his sleeve. The weight of her fear had lifted, replaced by a profound gratitude and something warmer, a spark of trust and something that might grow into love. "Thank you," she said quietly. Not for rescuing her, but for believing in her, for letting her stand tall. For showing her that freedom wasn't just about escaping chains, but about finding courage within herself. Talon inclined his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. "You had the courage all along," he said. "I only made sure the world didn't take it from you." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, Mary felt a sense of clarity she had never known. She had been tested, humiliated, hunted, and betrayed. Yet she had survived, chosen her own path, and stood up to those who would control her. The West was harsh, and the world was often cruel. But Mary now understood something vital. Her life was her own, her voice mattered, and she could face whatever came next, with or without Talon, and beside her, Talon was more than just a protector. He was a partner, a man who honored her courage, and a steady presence in a world that had tried to strip her of everything. Together, they turned back toward the trail, leaving the dust and fear of Red Rock Crossing behind. The canyon stretched before them, vast and unknown, but Mary no longer felt fear. She felt freedom, strength, and the beginnings of love that promised to carry her into a future of her own making. The canyon stretched out before them, wide and untamed, a ribbon of sun-drenched wilderness leading into the unknown. Mary Whitlock sat astride her horse, the morning wind tugging at her hair, carrying the scent of sage, pine, and freedom. Behind her, Talon rode with the same steady, unwavering presence he had shown since rescuing her from the auction platform. Yet today, there was something different, a weight lifted, a quiet tension released, as if the trials of the past weeks had finally settled into the soil beneath their feet. Mary glanced at him. His face, usually so unreadable, held a softness she had rarely seen. The fire of their shared adventures, the laughter, the quiet moments by the campfire, and the battles they had faced together had changed them both. She realized that, despite her fear and grief, she had come to trust him completely. More than that, she felt something deeper, something she had not expected to find in the shadow of humiliation and hardship: love. They rode in silence for a while, letting the rhythm of the horses carry them. The canyon walls rose like sentinels on either side, protective and constant. Mary's thoughts drifted to the auction platform, the cruel townsfolk, and the shame she had carried so long. And she realized she was no longer defined by those moments. She had reclaimed herself, her voice, and her choices. Freedom was not only being unshackled from debt and ridicule, it was being able to decide whom to trust, whom to love, and how to live. At a bend in the trail, Talon stopped his horse. He dismounted first and offered his hand to Mary. She took it, steadying herself as she swung down from her saddle. He led her to a grassy knoll overlooking a sparkling creek far below. The sunlight danced on the water, reflecting gold and green like a promise of new beginnings. Talon's voice was low, almost hesitant. "Mary, you owe me nothing. I only paid the world's debt so it couldn't claim you. You are free, always." Mary looked into his eyes, dark, strong, and yet tender, and felt the truth of his words settle into her chest. She had been free in body before, but never in spirit. Now she felt it fully capable of making her own choice. "I know," she whispered, And yet, I choose you. The words startled even her. But as she spoke them, she felt the chains of fear and shame dissolve. She was not saying she belonged to him. She was saying that her heart, her free and courageous heart, had chosen him. That choice was hers and hers alone. Talon's expression softened, a rare and fleeting smile touching his lips. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his careful, reverent. "Then I am honored," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I will never claim you as property, only as the woman who stands beside me by her own will." Mary smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of relief and joy. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and respected. Not as a widow, not as someone in debt, not as someone to be sold, but as herself. They stood together, watching the creek sparkle in the canyon below, feeling the warmth of the sun on their faces and the cool wind tugging at their clothes. In that moment, there was no fear, no judgment, no past to haunt them, only freedom, trust, and the promise of a shared life. Finally, Talon spoke again, quieter this time. "We ride forward together?" Mary nodded, squeezing his hand. Together. Mounting their horses, they set off down the trail, leaving behind the dust, the cruelty, and the chains of Red Rock Crossing. Ahead lay the unknown, but for the first time, it was a future she was eager to meet, not afraid of. And as they rode side by side, Mary realized that love was not ownership, nor control, nor possession. Love was choice. And today, for the first time, she had chosen freely and been chosen in return. The West stretched before them, wild and untamed. And for the first time, Mary felt like she truly belonged not to anyone else, but to herself, and to the man she had chosen to ride beside into whatever adventures lay ahead.